of Just One Time, a nonprofit organization online. You will find that at just one, the number one, the numeral one, X, which stands for time.com. Penny, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, Just One Time is a name for an organization that was born out of tragedy, and we appreciate your willingness to talk about this. A very personal tragedy. Why don't you tell us what happened in your life, the tragedy that unfolded in your life in 2008?
Well, on September 7th at 1:30 in the morning, I actually was living in Atlanta, Georgia at the time. I got a message to call my daughter, and she basically said, "Mom, are you alone?" I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, Kyle's dead." And of course, as a mom, you immediately go into shock. And I was thinking, car accident, that kind of thing. She said, "Mom, I'm really sorry to tell you, but Kyle died in an accidental heroin overdose." And the first words out of my mouth were, "Someone's lying to you. He would never, ever do something like that." And she said, "I'm sorry, Mom, but it's true." And, of course, I made my way back over. And so what had happened is Kyle had gone over to Portland. He lived in Central Oregon and was going over to Portland to a series of concerts, with a group of friends. He had known, he died just before his 22nd birthday, and he'd known these kids since he was in junior high. And they went over and stayed in this home, and heroin was brought in, and he did it that night and literally fell asleep surrounded by his friends. His lungs collapsed, and he fell asleep and died.
Penny, as you look back on that story of what happened to your son Kyle, were there any signs, or were you caught completely by surprise when you heard the news?
Well, in high school, there were a few signs of his dad and I had divorced when he was 9 years old, and I think, looking back now, probably around his sophomore or junior year, I started seeing him get angry and at rejection. So there were some signs, and there he had gotten in trouble with drinking one time. We had this awesome conversation. He was embarrassed because of what he had put his friends through. So it was open communication, but this caught me by surprise. I had no idea. And I think what was more shocking to me than even that was when we met with the young men that were with him. They all asked to meet with us about 3 days after Kyle died. They gave an account for that last day, and all of them knew something was going on. In fact, one of the young men said to me, "Penny, I knew in my gut something was wrong and I should say something, but I just didn't want him to get mad at me. I thought maybe if he could just sleep it off, we'd talk in the morning." No one expected Kyle to die that night, not even Kyle. I mean, he had come home to save money to go on a mission trip to Uganda. And so very shocking, and really shocking that no one felt like they could say anything to him that night.
Now, Penny, is that the young man who, I think on your website, there's a video testimony from a young man who is talking about his regrets. Is that young man?
Yes, that's Jason. And Jason actually didn't even know that Kyle had done heroin, but he recognized that Kyle was off and he had not seen him like that. And he just knew something, Kyle had taken something that was altering his behavior, but really didn't feel, like he could say anything, or he didn't know what to say, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, what is it that keeps friends friends from doing what they know in retrospect they ought to do? Is it fear? Is it because they don't know what to say? Is it they're afraid their friend's going to get angry, or what?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's such a good question. As I travel across the United States and I speak in junior high and high schools on the power of friendships and the consequences of risky behavior, and of course that code of silence that is it's in every school. And when I ask kids why, I mean, these were kids that were Kyle's best friends. They weren't someone that was a brand new kid that didn't even know him. And what they are saying is, number one is, I don't want my friend to get mad at me. Number two is, I don't want to get him in trouble. And number three is, I don't want to be known as a narc in the school. That's just a huge, big taboo thing is, we friends don't tell. We tell our kids not to tattletale. But what we're trying to do is we have to break the code of silence on these kids that are living dangerously, because the new demographic of children that are living dangerously are these kids that are so hard to detect because they're very active in their community. Many of them are active in their church. But it's this new thing. What's so acceptable at parties or even get-togethers, what kids are doing recreationally, with even in the church, is very, very scary and horrifying. As I'm getting into this world and understanding more of it.
Penny, before we and do want to talk some more about this risky behavior on the part of ever younger demographics, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Just One Time? When did you form it? What is the purpose of it? What is your core message to students? Why don't you fill us in a little bit of that background?
Sure. We started, I spoke 5 times within the first 3 weeks of my son's death. I think I was so shocked by the code of silence that I was learning as Kyle's death happened and we're preparing for his funeral. And the Lord just gave me this message. I call it Good Kids Living Dangerously. And really just stuck. And then I went back to Atlanta and really entered into what I would call the grieving process, the acute grief where you're pretty much numb, and then moved back to Central Oregon to start Just One Time. But what we do, our core message is we challenge students to break the code of silence on behalf of their friends who are living dangerously and seek help for them, because there is such power in friendship. And that is what we really focus in on, the power of friendship, using Kyle's story and other stories in our 45-minute assembly. So we speak to junior high and high school kids. Sometimes I've been on several reservations in the Dakotas speaking to youngest as 4th graders and 5th graders. But what I'm seeing across the country is friendships are number one, and even in some situations in junior high and high school, the friendship relationship is more powerful even than the family connect. And, of course, that depends on what family you're from. But in America, those friendships in school are so strong, and you can use them for good or you can use them for making really bad choices. And so what we do is we take a real-life story. The kids don't even know that I'm Kyle's mom when we first start talking. And so they hear from a mom. They hear from his best friend. They hear the actual 911 call from Kyle's death, because I wanted to make it not an MTV, like this is some person that's telling a story. This is a real person. This was a real 911 call. And this is a friend who has regrets, because it takes it from being something flashy or on television, or like the bad guy is your favorite, movie star, and he always comes out in the end. It takes it from that to real life. So that I say, you guys, Kyle could be sitting next to you. He's that blonde, strawberry blonde kid that's sitting right over there or right over there. And so when I walk away, they have a real sense of this could happen to them or it could happen to their friends. Because what I found is I talked to 3 groups of students, kids who are living dangerously right now, kids who aren't, but they're thinking about it because the really cool kids are starting to do it. And number 3 are kids that have no intention of ever living dangerously, but they know somebody who is, and they're keeping it secret.
Penny, tell us your website, and also tell us if there are folks out there, school officials, administrators, folks who want to bring you in to do an assembly, because this sounds like something very much that young people need to hear. Tell us your website and how people could book you in to do an assembly.
Sure. Our website is www.just1x.com, just1x.com. And they can contact us at contact@just1x.com or penny@just1x.com. And that information is on the website as well.
Penny, let me ask you this, and I know we're running down to the last few minutes, but what is it that has happened in America? When I'm 55 years old, I don't have any problem admitting that on the air. But when I was growing up, I wasn't a Christian. I had no real internal reason to not do the things I did. I did, some drinking in high school and college, and I stayed away from drugs because my dad was a former Marine and he didn't like that quote unquote hippie stuff. so I didn't want to get in trouble with that. But I knew he was smoking dope, and maybe a couple were doing something, harder than that. I grew up in the 70s following the 60s when college-age kids, for the most part, were, doing LSD and harder stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But what has happened in America that has made not only this kind of risky behavior, but also sexual risky behavior? You talked about parties, the things that are going on at parties that I won't even mention on the air. I'm sure you've heard all the horror stories as well. But what is going on that all these risky behaviors have come down the ladder to even junior high and younger? I mean, we all know young people think they're invincible. They don't realize their own mortality. But why is this drifted down to younger and younger ages?
Well, I think there's a lot of reasons. I think everything is so accessible. You can go on the internet and find out how to do anything. You can find out, well, I don't even want to say it on air, but you can find out anything you want, good or bad. And I think, too, that kids are living at such a high intensity, like the next thrill, the next best thing. I mean, you see kids juicing or taking steroids at a younger age so that they can perform better in athletes. So how much is enough? How good is good enough? And I think we need to redefine what that means with our kids. Are we pressuring them? Are we, what I tell parents is they have to be very intentional at a young age to create an atmosphere where their kids can talk about absolutely anything. And you are holding back the shock. You are holding back the reaction. You're listening to your kids. So when they come and talk to you about the hard stuff, whether it's about them or somebody else, but what we're seeing out there, the risky behavior is so intensified. What's acceptable at parties is no longer alcohol and weed. It's high performance drugs. It's black tar heroin is very scary. And another thing is prescription pills, because you go to the dentist, you have a toothache, you get it pulled, whatever. They're giving you 30 Vicodin or 30 oxycodone. You take one, it goes in the cabinet. And what we're finding is a lot of kids are really getting hooked on prescription pills, but the black market to buy pills is very expensive, so they go immediately to heroin because it's in that opiate family. And so heroin's $10 a bag for black tar heroin. So it's very scary how accessible risky behavior is to our students. And what I tell kids is risky behavior is anything you or your friends are doing that could have a life-altering consequence.
Penny, I'm sorry.
Penny,
I'm sorry. We are just about out of time.
No worries.
Thank you so much for being on the show with us, and thank you for being willing to share your pain with the world in hopes of saving just a few more. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Folks, we'll be back after the break. Keep listening to Today's Issues.